Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Speaking Legally. As you can hear, a little background noise. We're on the road, but we're still having a great show on location. I'm gonna let my co-host greet you as well. 4 p.m. every Wednesday, we're here where the legal meets the culture. So, welcome back to Speaking Legally. Over to you. ¿Cómo está, señor Richaro?
Muy bien, gracias. And happy belated birthday to Dr.
Thank
Grant.
you.
Absolutely. I wanna send those shout outs. Feliz cumpleaños a ti, los tuyos. Good afternoon, buenas tardes, todo el mundo. Audience, hello. Ed Pichardo, speaking legally. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm sure you'll find the information fulfilling, spiritual, as well as educational.
And you're not too late because I celebrate all month long. So thank you, Ed. It's Libra season. And over to you, Mr. Russell.
Hey, welcome everybody. As you can see, I'm on location. You see the H and the M behind me? That stands for Harlem Masters, the world finest barbershop here located in Harlem, USA. Because as you know, through this show, mental health is something that we speak often about, especially when it involves law enforcement and how law enforcement deals with mental health. And what brings me to Harlem is that I have to go for my annual checkup, which is your physical health. And we often talk about that, talk about getting the COVID shot, talking about making sure that you dot your I's and you cross your T's so you can live to see another day. Another birthday for my brother Ed, another birthday for Dr. Grant. And so that brings me to Harlem. And I'm not going to give up the show because I have other things to do in life. Life will just come with me on the show. That's how we do, because you're important to us and we know the information is important. And this story and what we're about to talk about, this topic is so timely that we couldn't wait for another week for it to happen. So here we are today, and I hope you enjoy this show. And let's keep it pushing. Or let's keep it driving. Let's go to the next hole, Dr. Grant, since you're in the car. I don't know what you want to use. I see somebody took out the Club 9 behind you. I hope they're going to use it on the course, you know?
Absolutely. And hey, Richard. And yes, the birthday shenanigans continues. Now, it's all good times. But before we get to that, we always do a little cultural piece. So there was a little history made in NASCAR. And we want to just shout out Bubba Wallace,
Yes.
because he is the first to win, apparently, or the second black driver to win a NASCAR Cup race. So,
Nah, and I think this is a great piece for us to talk about here. Congrats to Bubba Wallace. As probably most of you are well aware, there are very few African American race car drivers in NASCAR or even internationally. And to see this brother be the second African American to win this race, which I believe is a series of races and qualifiers, is absolutely amazing. The team that he races for, I believe that team is partially funded by none other than Michael Jordan. So, shouts out to Mike on this beautiful victory. That, it takes a lot of resources to even participate in any of these races in terms of the cars, the engines, etc. And if you recall, about maybe I believe it was 2 years ago, Bubba Wallace found a noose in I believe like his garage area where his cars were, and the NASCAR community rallied around him because of that, and that also, I believe, led to the removal of Confederate flags at these races, because most of them take place in these southern states where for many years, the participants and the fans thought it was, just fine to wave a Confederate flag. So, this is big here. So much props to Bubba Wallace.
I'm never going to take away from anybody that that achieve the things that we want our people of black and brown descent to achieve. And I'm always going to push the envelope. So I'm going to push the envelope even with Bubba Wallace and all the great things that he does and represent. If you scroll up, Dr. Grant, you see when you're a NASCAR driver right there, that's enough. Come down just a little bit. You wear these jackets, and this is all the sponsors that sponsor you. And if you scroll down in the article, you see him with a jacket that has a big M for McDonald's. And so I'm asking my benevolent brother in the eyes of upholding our race and upholding who we are and going through the racism that he went through, and Michael Jordan backing him, my request to you is that make a little space for some black-owned businesses that are here in America striving on your jacket, even though we're not sponsoring you. Make a space for Golden Crust. Make a space for Cardiac Arrest. Make a space for Faithpreneur. Make a space for those that you know support you in your achievements, but can't support you financially, which is a requirement to be on that jacket. So on Speaking Legally, the culture, the legal, the achievements, we're always pushing for more. At least I'm pushing for more. And I know that may rub Mike the wrong way because Mike is silent in what he do, but sometimes you got to stand up.
No doubt.
Well said. Well said. Well, we're going to keep it moving with the information that we have today on another topic. So stand by as I bring that up. I'm trying to keep the background noise down, but that's not working. So we're just going to roll with it because I'm on location. And we have in the news, it seems like the coverage is a little different when NYPD gets on trial. What say you, Mr. Russell?
Well, there's a couple of things. If you can scroll up, and let's just look at what we're really seeing when you get a moment. First of all, I think we switched articles somehow. Your tab must have switched over. It's important that when we look at the article that you first put up, how things are depicted, what it looks like, and how perception can become the reality. And can you get that up, or it's going to take some time? Okay. And so, first of all, for all the audience to know that this incident happened sometime in 2016. Deborah Dana suffered from schizophrenia, was in her apartment. Her sister called. The police came, 3 police officers, 2 EMTs, and her sister was there. The police entered her apartment. She was allegedly, supposedly, I don't know, I wasn't there, I did not see the trial, was waving a knife. The police officers were able to talk her away from the knife or putting the knife down. And then for some odd reason, no one can explain, she then picked up a bat, allegedly swung it at this officer, and the officer fired 1 or 2 shots and killed her. All right. And so this article right here speaks to that although the officer was acquitted of manslaughter when he was tried in the Bronx by way of bench trial, all these things I'm mentioning, we're going to talk more in detail, but I'm just giving you a summary. By way of bench trial, now he's facing disciplinary hearings within the NYPD, New York City Police Department. Before we even get into the subject matter, look at the picture of the officer.
Scroll up a little bit, I think, Dr. Grant, because we don't. Okay, all right.
Look at Dr. Barry. Now we know, here's the cultural part. Anybody of brown or black skin tone that is arrested and charged with any criminal act whatsoever, no newspapers put in their high school prom picture as the picture of what they look like when they're going through trial. We know that for a fact, but once again, critical minds, critical thinking, critical looking, critical analysis, what we call subconscious, unconscious bias.
So he wasn't wearing his tuxedo when he got arrested, Royce?
No, and he wasn't wearing his tuxedo when he was in the apartment of Deborah Dana. He wasn't wearing his tuxedo when he shot the fatal shot. Why don't they show him in his uniform? How do we get this picture? How does this picture come up? And it's those subliminal messages that are always sent out there. We already know within the criminal justice system, whether you go bench trial or jury trial, it takes a lot for a jury to convict a police officer of anything. But it's little items like this that always pop up that turns on my critical thinking light, that reassures that I have a right to be jaded by what I see, because I know the cards in the deck are not 52. Somebody got 55. I'm working with 51. There's other people in our community that's working with 50. And this is part and parcel of what I'm talking about. He didn't look that way. Why even put a picture out there? Are you kind of trying to marshal that this is a good dude? This is an all right guy? Come on.
And just for the audience's edification, what my colleague Royce is talking about basically is that, you know, when for most criminal charges, you have the option of choosing whether to have your case heard by a jury of your peers, right? Or the judge, whoever that judge may be that's presiding over the case, can also be what they call the trier of fact, meaning that that judge will not only get to say decide, you know, motions in terms of what should come in and what should not, but then also hear the case and decide whether or not the person is guilty or not beyond a reasonable doubt. And so in what you will notice in many of these cases, when an officer is charged and the case does go to trial, they will in many cases choose a bench trial in the hope that that judge, who may or may not be of somewhat conservative leanings, will acquit as opposed to a jury.
You use the word in hope. We know that the fix is in. And I just want to make it abundantly clear. There's two type of hearings that go on. There's a criminal case, if we're lucky to get that.
Yeah.
If we're lucky to get that, we can count on our hands, on our fingers, how many trials we've seen where officers actually are convicted or actually indicted. So we're lucky if we get that. Now, in that process, you have a choice to go bench or jury, as Ed said, jury of your peers. Now, you're in a community of people that's black and brown. You kill someone that's black or brown.
Yeah, this happened in the Bronx.
In the Bronx, the relationship between the community is not the best. And you have a choice between picking people from that community or going bench trial. You're going to go bench trial. And that means the judge hears everything. The judge is the only person that makes a decision. Well, you also know that your attorneys have done research about this judge and kind of know maybe where the judge might be leaning and swinging in reference to law enforcement. I can tell you, if I was a judge and they had a choice to look at me and say, oh, no, whether we're going to go bench or jury, I'm sure they'd be rustling up 60 people and 12 people to get in the jury box because they didn't want to hedge their bet on that.
So they're not going to rely on your impartiality as a judge?
They're not rolling those dice. They think those dice they think those dice got nothing but ones all around it. Snake eyes all day, despite what I may do in the community. Despite my political affiliation, because they're going on their own prejudice. And that's something that we need to really discuss, and we could discuss it right now, because I think for certain crimes, and this is Royce Russell speaking legally, attorney of 20-something years, this is what he thinks. I think for certain crimes, you shouldn't have an option of bench or jury. Now, that ensures that in a case like this, where you're charged with manslaughter, that people of the community is going to hear this case. That's the upside.
Now,
is that a guy like you and I, or anybody else, cousin Fred, cousin Ned, sister Jacqueline, Shaquita, they get charged with something that is a violent crime, then they get stripped of having a bench, and all they have is a jury trial. But my experience has told me, my personal experience, that most defendants, if it's us, don't trust the judge to make a decision on their own in our favor anyway. So we're gonna go to jury no matter what.
And for the audience, keep in mind that there are certain crimes that you don't even get a chance to get a jury trial on, that it's automatic bench. So the idea of for higher level crimes removing the bench trial option is not as radical as it may seem.
Right, because you have it in misdemeanor cases. Misdemeanors are cases that you go to jail for 60, 90 days or less, right? And so be misdemeanors in New York City, there's no jury trial. That's a bench trial, violation of order of protection, disorderly conduct. Those are bench trial, quality of life crimes. Those are bench trials. So as you said, Ed, right, it's not far-fetched. We just have to do what we have to do in our community, put pen to paper. We have a new district attorney that's going to be coming up in Manhattan. Maybe that's something that we write to him and say, look, this is something that needs to be looked at, because far too many times when it comes down to law enforcement, they choose bench trial, and that is a straight choice to acquittal. That's a straight choice to get out of jail free. I'm going home. And what brings us here today is that this is what happened to this officer Barry. He was acquitted back in 2018, when this happened in 2016. And now, finally, 5 years later, he's facing the administrative part which is the police department and the Civilian Complaint Review Board, prosecution is taking place to see whether or not he'll be terminated from his alleged $152,000 job that he's been matriculating while this case has been going on. And if he's been on the force long enough, it may not matter what happens at this hearing. He may have enough to have his pension and keep it moving.
Exactly. And just for the audience sake, some of you may be thinking, well, how does he get acquitted but still face a disciplinary hearing? As Royce mentioned, these are two different types of hearings, but not just that. More importantly, they have different evidentiary standards, meaning that in a jury in the criminal case, the prosecution had to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In the administrative proceeding, it's a much lower burden. Let me replace that: burden of proof, not evidentiary standard, but burden of proof. The burden of proof in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. In an administrative hearing, it's by preponderance of the evidence, meaning that is it more probable than not that he did what he's being accused of, which is much lower.
And let me just interject on top of that: the evidentiary rules in administrative hearing can be relaxed. That means certain evidence that may not come in a criminal case, the administrative judge may allow in a civil case. And before we go even dig deeper, as my wife says, let's dig deeper, let's go down, let's touch your feelings, let's go to the nerve, let's go to the white meat. You can't just get to the blood.
That part, really?
Let's go to the white meat. In the criminal case, most administrative hearings, in my view, from what I've seen, follows the road of the criminal case. That means the administrative judge feels less of an urgency. There's less of an outcry if the person's not been convicted on a criminal case, notwithstanding that the burden of proof is higher beyond a reasonable doubt. It may do wonders for the civil case, the fact that they're indicted, and as in this case, the family was awarded, the estate was awarded $2 million. It might do wonders for the civil side, but at the end of the day, we want people that act in the way that this officer acted, given the circumstances, given that he did not go to crisis intervention training. He skipped that course. That course didn't make it. And that course would have probably done a hell of a good in this scenario. And we want to make sure that officers that act inappropriately are removed from the force.
And just to be clear here, what we're talking about here, and my understanding is that there was already, I believe, an EMS on the scene that were able to talk. That were able to talk Deborah Dana out of using a pair of scissors. She actually dropped those scissors, in my understanding.
Right.
They were able to speak to her, and calm her down. Okay. All of a sudden, what is it? Murphy is his name here? The sergeant?
Yeah, it was Sergeant Hugh Barry.
Hugh Barry, right? The sergeant gets there, and all of a sudden, he interrupts the conversation between the EMS and Deborah Danner, and then goes into
her
Mr. And she moves into the bedroom. They go in there, and he's the only one in there with her when she gets shot, claiming that she swung a bat at him. Okay, this officer was prosecuted basically for failure to follow the procedures and the protocols that were in place for dealing with a mentally ill person. And I just want to mention on a personal note that I recently had a personal experience with something similar, because I have a person in my family who suffers from schizophrenia, and the police had to be called, and thank God that everything was done per protocol, per procedure. There was a social worker that was there who was trained in dealing with someone with mental health issues. The officers that arrived there were deferential basically to that social worker and allowing her to do what she needed to do. And they were also deferential to me as the family member in terms of their handling and what was going to happen next and so forth. And you know, these were members of the Albany Police Department. So, you know, much kudos to these folks and to these officers and this mobile mental health crisis social worker, because they did the right thing. And so, you know, I'm just saying from a personal standpoint and a personal point of view that I've experienced this and I know what can happen when things are done the right way.
And you know,
Right.
I'm speaking from a standpoint of common sense, and we know that sense is not that common, but
Ugh.
common sense would say, just like in the Trawick Kowalski case, right? You know, Kowalski Trawick case. The individual they're in their home. They're not a danger to anybody else in the public. One of the procedures and policies and procedures of the NYPD, you better believe I know this because I've sued them zillions of times, is contain and isolate. Isolate and contain. Make sure the person cannot harm someone else. And for the life of me, why isn't it easier to either one, let the EMTs do what they need to do, let the family member, like in your case, because Deborah Dana's sister was present, help in trying to bring her out of her crisis, because that's what she was in crisis. And if everything else goes sour, leave. She's contained. She's in a home. Kowalski was in his home. He's contained. Daniel Prue up in Rochester was in the street with no clothes on, handcuffed, contained. Why are you putting a spit bag on him? Why does he have to die by asphyxiation, suffocation? Why does Kowalski have to die by a gunshot, for them being shot in his direction, when only thing he's asking is, why are you in his home? Why does Deborah Dana even have to pick up a bat if you just leave the apartment? Isolate and contain. And so, even though on the criminal level, there is no legal and punitive way to punish him for failing to adhere to police procedures, policies, and procedures, that's why we have this administrative hearing here, where those things could be looked into. And the reason why we bring it up, and the reason why I wanted to make sure that this was the focus of this show, is one, because it's going on right now, the hearing. Two, people in our community probably have never heard of the administrative hearing, so don't know that it goes on. Three, people in our community don't know that it's open to the public. And so when you want to elevate your level of advocacy, your level of outrage, you go to these things. You sit in that audience. You crowd that courtroom. You don't make it easy for someone to just dot the I and pro forma have a trial, but not really have a trial, to make sure that certain things happen the way that they want to happen. We already know it's an internal process, and I'll leave some of that stuff up to you, Ed, to talk about the internal process. So the police are self-regulating themselves. We don't have a role or play a part in it. So here we are looking from the outside in.
So before we continue on, I showed the $2 million that was given to the family. And sometimes you feel like when you hear those decisions, it's almost to soften the blow of not getting a conviction. And I just want both of you, from a legal perspective, just to share how that was possible, but he didn't get convicted, and what that really says before we go back into the disciplinary hearing that's being policed by the police.
Well, it's to me, it's somewhat of an oxymoron, right? It's like a walking contradiction. It's a couple of things, right? One, we know that the level, the standard for a criminal matter is higher. So maybe I can understand how, not in this particular case, but 12 jurors don't agree. The level of evidence doesn't meet the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. I don't particularly understand it when it comes down to cases of this nature, but maybe that's what happened. So now you have the city settling the case. Somebody has an understanding that something went wrong. As a matter of fact, I was surprised to hear by reading some of the articles that Mayor de Blasio actually stood up in this case and said that this police officer failed Deborah Dana, failed the family. I mean, I had to wipe my eyes twice. You know what I mean? And when I read that. And then the commissioner back then said that the police officer failed to follow procedures and protocol. So when you have those type of statements, there is pressure for the city to resolve the financial end of it. Okay. And before that person, quote unquote, after administrative hearing may be terminated, because we'll tell you who has the last laugh in deciding whether they're terminated. Before that happens, you might want to resolve the civil side of it, because the damages will only increase if rulings are in your favor as to liability. The funny thing about the statements that I just said about other people making, I think O'Neill was the commissioner then when this happened. One, no statement that de Blasio says comes into court. That's his opinion, but thank you for it. And any statement that O'Neill makes in reference to him losing his job doesn't really survive the day that he makes a statement and is on paper. Because once he steps down as commissioner, the new commissioner comes in and say, the hell with what you said and the hell with how you see it. I see it differently. So it's not always easy, but it's the way for the city to dispose of exposure and limit their exposure. Resolve a matter that could be $5 million, resolve it at a $2 million, settlement, because they don't know what may happen down the line. And so that's how you get that resolution.
Okay. And thank you for, explaining that to our audience. This is where the legal meets the cultural. So you're looking at it like he didn't get convicted, but there was a settlement. How did those pieces fall into place? And now we're at the disciplinary hearing.
Correct.
So apparently what's going on now is that at some point now we talked about on the show about the Civilian Complaint Review Board and the complaint process. And we talked about that in depth on a previous show. So really, this is about what happens once CCRB substantiates the charges. They did their investigation and they substantiated the allegations against this sergeant, this police sergeant.
And let me just add, what is important about what you have just said, Ed, is that we can't even get to the administrative hearing and everything else if you don't file a CCRB. If you don't file a complaint with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, we don't even get to any prosecution on a disciplinary level, because I profess, Royce Russell, attorney at law, Royce Russell, African-American male in the community, Royce Russell, having an understanding of relationship between police, in our community, having an understanding of how police departments work in and of itself. I can't rely on internal affairs, which is the internal investigation that police departments do to actually discipline one of their own. Continue, Ed.
Yeah, so what you have here now, the charges are substantiated. So now the hearing on those, and this is interesting, right? Because a year ago, there was a huge legislative victory in allowing police misconduct records to go public. But one of the things that didn't happen, and some people have commented on, is the fact that the police department continues to be able to conduct its own internal hearings, basically judging itself. And what I mean by that is that usually an employee of the city, if you are found to engage in some sort of misconduct and a hearing takes place, is at the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, which is otherwise known as OAF. Here it's a little different. Even though, there are charges against this officer of misconduct, instead of it being heard by an administrative judge with OAF, it's instead heard by a hearing officer that's actually appointed by the commissioner.
Can you
is my
repeat
understanding.
that? Can you repeat that one more time?
Instead of an oath administrative judge hearing in the case, and by the way, these oath judges are appointed to certain terms, so they don't necessarily serve at the pleasure. They work, they get appointed and they serve this many years, and they are considered independent because of that. They can't just be removed. They don't serve at the pleasure, etc. However, the hearing officer is going to hear, who's hearing the case here, is someone that's appointed by the police commissioner. And then after they make their finding, either upholding the charges or the opposite, the commissioner still has a say as to whether or not to go ahead and follow the recommendation, say, of removal of this officer.
Let me do what Dr. Grant says. Let me put a pin in it because she's on the road because she may not be able to find her pins, right? So we're going to put a pin in it. Let's put a pin in it because I don't think there's pins on the golf cart right there. So let's put a pin in that right there, right? And the reason why I want to put a pin in it is, as you said, talking about personal experience, having to deal with plenty of cases that went to oath, but in particular, one where we're seeking termination, Ramarley Graham case, right? 5 years later, the officer is now coming up for the hearing, right? Now we look at who's the players, right? In cardiac arrest, we talk about who the players if you get arrested. We talk about there's legal aid. We talk about there's a prosecutor. We talk about that there's 18B. We talk about that there's private attorney. We talk about that there's a jury. There's a district attorney. There's assistant district attorneys. We talk about all the players that you're about to meet when you go on this journey. So I'm going to put a pin in it and say, here's the players that you're about to meet when you go on this journey in dealing with a disciplinary case where you're trying to have an officer terminated for misconduct. The lawyers that are trying to get the officer fired or terminated or whatever disciplinary action they're trying to put forth, those are lawyers within the police department. Their legal bureau prosecutes the lawyer. Sounds a little janky, might be a little janky. Maybe there should be an independent person that comes in and tries that case, not someone that gets a paycheck from the police department. Put a question mark, put a hashtag, put an exclamation point, put a couple of things. It seems a little weird to me, right? On the other side, the police officer who's defending against the charges, the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, is representing him by way of making sure that he gets an attorney. Not an attorney that he can pay for, an attorney that we pay for with our tax dollars, because our tax dollars go to their salary. Part of their salary goes to the union for dues, and that dues is used to hire the person that's going to defend that police officer. Sounds a little janky, huh? You might want to put your critical thinking hat on backwards because it's getting a little rough in here, right? Think about that. Then on top of that, as Ed said, the administrative judge that is hearing the case is also part of the police department. They are appointed. They don't have terms. Guess what? I don't even know their names. You know their names, Ed?
No, not in particular.
Right? Dr. Grant, you know their name?
Absolutely not.
Okay, then, right? So this person is making a decision, favorable or not. You don't even know. You might read about it of New York One, Dean Memberger, or somebody like that decides that they're going to write an article, the Gotham and New York Times, maybe the Post, Daily News, if they write an article about it like they did in this one. Other than that, you wouldn't even know that this case was going on. So this administrative judge makes the decision, depending upon how the evidence is brought in. Nobody from the community is present because they don't know about it. They don't realize that it's public. So we're going to keep that under wraps. And maybe there's a protest outside of one police plaza, but that's about it. I mean, look, kudos to all the social activist groups out there, Johan, you name it, Loida, so many I can't even go through the list. Gathering for Justice, Justice NYU, Until Freedom, National Action Network, who have these, protests and rallies to make sure that the light is shined on them. on the fact that the hearing is happening, but nobody from the community is actually inside the hearing and seeing what's going on, because either there's so many press in there or we just don't know about it. So now, so now you add insult to injury at the end when a decision is made, which is where you left off, and I'll give it back to you. The commissioner who's now sitting, he's the one that makes the final decision. And you better believe in between there, negotiations like in the Ramarley Graham case is going on, where somebody might retire early and get the pension or resign, so therefore they won't be terminated.
And just to mention, it's not for lack of trying that the activists have not tried to change this system. When CCRB was able in New York City to get the power to prosecute these cases, they were also seeking to control the hearing process as well, to make that independent. However, there was a challenge in court. And while they were allowed to continue to at least to have the prosecution part of it, to keep that power, they were not allowed to control the hearing process itself.
And Gathering for Justice, one of the biggest advocacy groups out there, was pushing on the legislative level to make sure that is transparency in that area.
And what we're talking about here is unconsolidated law, section 891, which states hearings upon charges pursuant to this act shall be held by the officer or body having the power to remove the person charged with incompetency or misconduct, or by a deputy or other employee of such officer or body designated in writing for that purpose. In case of a deputy or other employee is so designated, he shall, for the purpose of such hearing, be vested with all powers of such officer or body, and shall make a record of such hearing, which shall, with his recommendations, be referred to such officer or body for review and decision. All that gobbledygook basically means is that for these hearings that may result in recommendations for termination against police officers from being conducted by a non-employee of the police department, 891 bars a hearing that's run or conducted by a non-employee of the police department. So only the police department can basically hold a hearing for their own in terms of misconduct.
And Ed, we would like, in the world of Cinderella and Wizard of Oz and fairness and transparency, that a hearing is held by somebody that's independent.
And so what we tell our audience here is that it's incumbent upon you to put the pressure on your legislators because this is statewide, okay? New York City.
It is breaking up a little bit. This is
statewide.
Right. Continue, Ed.
This is a statewide issue because there are police departments all over the state. So the question is going to be right now. Listen, we have an African American controlling the Senate, an African American controlling the state assembly, and we may have an African American woman as governor if Tish James decides to run for governor. But certainly, if no other time, this is the time right now for the pressure to be put on to get these hearings to be conducted by an independent body.
And not only that, we know that this is on the hearts and minds of politicians that are seeking office, because candidate Wiley, she brought it up during her run for the Democratic candidacy for being mayor. She said, look, I want to have a civilian, preside over these matters. Now, her definition of civilian was a little different than my definition of civilian, but, civilian nonetheless, right? And so what you're saying needs to be introduced now, and we need to act on it now. As we are walking in the street protesting, we need to put pen to paper and start pushing in that area and in that way. Jumaane Williams, he is a public advocate in New York City. Statewide, as you said, Ed, it's nothing but Black and brown folks. And I don't see how are they removed from this scenario. Or
Well,
how their loved ones are removed, if that not them directly.
Well, that's the kind of accountability. I mean, where I am right now, I'm with Councilwoman Sylvina Brooks Powers, one of the elected officials on City Council, and this is a fundraiser for that. But it's about keeping people in office who we can hold accountable and who can address what needs to be addressed. There has to be a changing of the guard. It hasn't worked effectively. Not saying everybody's not a blanket statement, but we need more accountability. We need people to push for knowing how and who is getting to the table. We don't even know the name of who's sitting behind the desk making the decision. That's a problem.
And what's even more of a problem, right? Here's the other problem. Does anybody know how long this officer was suspended without pay, or whether or not he was suspended without pay, whether or not he ever had to do anything other than give him his badge and his gun and go down to the inventory room and take a new position with the same salary of $152,000 that he's getting of our taxpayer money?
That part.
And what blows my mind is that I would imagine that if there was a criminal trial on this set of facts, then whatever investigation that needed to be done, whatever evidence that needed to be collected, got collected 2.5 years ago.
Correct.
It shouldn't have taken this long for there to be a disciplinary hearing. It blows my mind.
Hence, we fast forward to Kowalski.
And by the way, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. In terms of CCRB's power to prosecute, there's also a memorandum of understanding that the police department will cooperate with the CCRB. Okay.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
So in terms of information, evidence, etc. Once again, this should have been resolved some time ago in terms of this moving forward.
And to your point, we can fast forward, right? Fast forward to, once again, Kowalski Trawick matter just happened in 2019. DA's office did a full investigation. COVID stagnated some things. Well, they have all the evidence. That evidence is for CCRB to have. What takes so long to get them that? Then upon them getting that, what takes so long for the police department to actually have a disciplinary trial? There's but 3 witnesses, the 2 officers that shot him and the decedent, Kowalski Trawick. The 4th witness is a video. Let's get it moving. Why is this taking so long? Now, here it is. We have everybody who's running for mayor, whether Republican or Democrat, and everybody speaks to transparency, and everybody speaks to that we want to make it a better place for Black and brown folks in New York City. Yeah, that's a great one, right? Can you roll that up again? You stopped me a minute though. De Blasio blames the pandemic and other for delays in the Kowalski Trawick case. Yeah, right. So now we're working through the pandemic, and that's not stopping the papers from being drafted and the reports that are there. Where are we now? And so that's how they get us to forget. That's how they get us to forgive. The wheels of justice moving so slowly that you have other things in your life that you fail to realize that this is actually happening, and controlling a media where the information is not disseminated, and relying on our complacency, our laziness, not to do what we need to do, which is due diligence and look at what is actually going on around us.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to bring up that article. I mentioned that I'm out here with our councilwoman, and so this is Councilwoman Sylvina Brooks Powers. She can't hear you, but she's waving. But this is one of the people that we're going to keep accountable for these sorts of cases. She is no joke. She's about the people. This is what she's doing. This is raising money to help her continue her
How you doing, Sylvina?
Yeah, she's here. He's like, hey, Sylvina. So this is why I'm on location today, still doing the show, but supporting my little sister. I'm so proud of her. She is absolutely incredible, and we need to keep putting people like this in office. Win with Black women. All right. Thanks for the commercial, boo. All right. I
But
couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. So
that's okay. That's more than appropriate, because at the end of the day, the more people that we have in positions that understand how things flow and trickle down through our community, the better we will be in the long run. And so this delay tactic has really worked to our detriment in keeping up with what is actually going on. And that is a major problem. And it's a major problem that the commissioner has the last word. There's no panel of three. There's no panel of five. There's one person making one decision, and that decision could be an opposite of what the administrative judge has handed down. And that's incredible. So why we go through the process? What are we doing here? We're putting on a good show? Is that what we're doing?
Well, I think is what you mentioned earlier. You know, it's an effort to wear down those who care, and that's why it's so crucially important that folks maintain their stamina, maintain their activism, don't stop, don't give up, don't stop speaking up, don't stop contacting the legislators, don't stop attending the rallies and the protests and writing the letters if you can't. Attend protests and rallies, write the letters, you know, send the messages, do what you got to do, make your voice heard, please be seen, so that those folks know that we aren't going to stop. We aren't going to give up.
And let me just say something. Let me just say something to add on to that. I'm reading from the article, one of the articles. It says the confrontation, you got to love that word, confrontation. What confrontation? Like, you got a gun, you know, I'm going through a mental crisis. That's a confrontation. All right.
You got a gun and you got a vest.
And you got a taser. I don't know why you're not using it. And you got the option to walk away. Right. So let's just confrontation, underline, score, highlight. The confrontation sparked protests and an increase in crisis intervention training. And that's training to help police officers deal with mentally ill, right? Among high-ranking police officers, after it was reported that Barry had not received the de-escalation course that he was supposed to take. And so then there was a vow to make sure that the CIT training would happen all over the 5 boroughs in the state of New York. And we would not see this again. That's 2016. Tell me why Kowalski Traywick is dead in 2019.
And that goes to show you that to a certain degree, a lot of this comes down to will. Okay, you could provide the training, but if those that you employ in that department aren't willing to take that training and receive it and truly digest it and implement it in their daily tasks and duties, then you're going to continue to have these incidents. And listen, I have visited the NYPD training facility in Queens. In fact, they have these special areas that are basically designed to replicate a bank, replicate a grocery store, replicate an apartment, so that these officers get real-time training into what it looks like to be in a place where somebody is acting out. The trainers basically said because I would go there as a chief of youth diversion with these high school interns, that we had a summer high school program at the Brooklyn DA's office, summer high school internship. And when we would take the students there, they would say to us, well, listen, this is where we do our de-escalation trainings. And they will have officers that I say will act in a way that a mentally ill person will act, to put those officers during training on the spot as to what they are supposed to do in those instances. So, I mean, you know, so now it needs to get to that point now where the accountability really starts coming down, because now the excuses are now limited. You know, oh, he didn't have training. He or she didn't know this was going to happen, or they didn't know, they didn't experience it, or they weren't equipped. Nah. They're running out of excuses. I mean,
and not only are they running out of excuses, I think it goes back to what you said, the mentality. I can go to a training and just check the box. I was there, got the
Exactly.
certificate, and I'm gone. And when you start to talk about social justice and social justice curriculum, it is just not, we don't want this to be a curriculum or an event that you just go to and you just like, well, I checked that box, I went to that class, because these things are happening in real time. And this also highlights, once again, which is another push that I push in cardiac arrest, and we push daily as attorneys of color in our practice, is that you can't rely on the entity that is oppressing you, abusing you, misusing you to correct their own wrongdoings and expect a positive result. It's like
Okay.
banging your head up against the wall. You're only going to get bruised. So you have to remove the power from them, whether it is empower yourself or whether it is by a vote or legislation, remove the power from them to put it in an independent party or put it with the independent party. But that's the route you have to go, because you'll never be able to infiltrate that agency to the level that you can get transparency that is needed in our community.
And also, it's also a matter for me of, okay, if you're the police commissioner, okay, you've been appointed as the police commissioner, right? Now you have to basically lead this police force, this paramilitary organization. Okay. In order for you to effectively do that, you need those officers to be loyal to you, right? And so if they ever feel somehow that they're being betrayed by their leader or they can't trust their leader, there's a possibility of them, say, rebelling, right, and not carrying out their duties the way they should or the way they're supposed to, right? So I would say that reciprocally, that commissioner has a certain amount of pressure in disciplining members of his own force for misconduct, that he doesn't ever want those officers that he's leading to think, he or she is leading to think, that he's not someone who cares about them or is loyal to them or looks out for them. And so I would say that that's the reason why you need someone independent. That commissioner has too much pressure upon him or herself to be able to really give justice to this type of hearing, to this type of proceeding in terms of misconduct. Yes, you can, and you can certainly, that officer can certainly has the ability to call an expert to talk about police procedure and the way things are supposed to go or not supposed to go, right? Fine. And that independent hearing officer gets to hear all that and then make a decision. But it needs to be an independent one. It can't be the police policing themselves, because, oh no one can judge an officer but another officer. I mean, come on.
I mean,
Well,
there's no industry where that works. There's no other industry
Exactly.
where that works. Lawyers don't police themselves. It goes to someone else. Doctors, it goes to a board. It goes to someone else. It does not happen. It only happens here. And I am amazed when I heard you say, the commissioner has to make sure that his employees, the paramilitary, quasi-military police, are in line and lock and step with him, because if he shows any type of weakness, according to them, then he would lose all type of respect. But how is it that everybody's rally around the bad actor, right? The bad actor. Remember, there's only a few bad apples in the group. Well, if there's only a few bad apples in the group, then you need to rally around the commissioner to do the right thing, to get rid of the bad apple, not rally against him to say we got to keep the bad apple.
Well, I'm just saying, unfortunately, what seems to, I repeatedly hear, oh, if you're not an officer, you don't know, you don't know what it's like. And it's like, wait a minute, hold on.
And my response to that is that if you ain't getting your head kicked in as an African American male, you don't know what it's like either.
Yeah, then you don't know what it's like, right?
How about that?
Well, we could be on this for a minute, because that's a whole nother topic of who's going to hold them accountable and how do you get to that independent commission committee, whatever needs to be. And that's why we need to have courageous people in office to start reimagining how government runs and how it's really for the people, by the people, for real, and not in just rhetoric. So thank you for sharing that. Let's have some final thoughts as we start to wind down.
And I think something to pay attention to for the audience is, and I'm sure both of you saw this, Edward Mullins, president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, the FBI raided the offices of the SBA and his home in Long Island. He's been forced, I would say was forced to resign by the Board of the Union to step down from his role as president. He is also in the middle of a process himself because he engaged in misconduct, in contravention of NYPD protocols and policies when releasing information, I believe, on the arrest of de Blasio's daughter and other levels and other things that he's been doing over the years.
But you see how that is politically tied, right? That is not the police department acting on their own to discipline one of their own. That is politicians saying, wait a minute, hold up. You thought you were going to go home scot-free? Come back here, right? And using the powers to be to make that happen. Now, we all know that when the FBI or at the U.S. Attorney's Office, Attorney General, you name it, when they come to your doorstep and they're coming to get documents in your computer and searching, that the case has already been had. They're not developing the case, they're adding on to the case. So this fake resignation, which we all know is forced resigning, is real. And we don't know what he may say in reference to how the police department works.
Let's push a pin in that for another show, because that is sounding kind of juicy. As we say, spill the tea. There's some tea on this one. But we thank you all for tuning in and being with us every Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, with our two legal experts, Edward Pichado Esquire and Royce Russell Esquire. It's where the legal meets the cultural. We need to be aware of what's going on. We need to put the right people in office to advocate for the rights of the people so that we can have a future. I mean, what will our children grow up in if we keep letting corruption and cray-cray, just downright cray-cray happen? So we pray for the families of those who didn't volunteer to be in the news, but because of these cases have become national names. So we continue to keep them in our prayers. Final words, gentlemen, before we close out.
Get it.
Well, folks, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and, just pay attention to the events as they continue to unfold. And on that note, I say peace to everyone and blessings.
And on the same note of keeping your eyes and ears open, make sure your memory is clear. Write these things down as to what you're trying to achieve on a micro and a macro level, right? We talk about these subject matters. We bring it to the forefront. We may not live in your community exactly, know who your assembly person is, but you do. And if it's important to you and you listen to our voices and you retain something, you're like, oh my God, yeah, I need to move on that, then move on it. It's nothing but time and space, as they said. It's nothing but time and space. Now, when they said that, they meant something else, but we can use it for here. There's nothing but time and space. So let's keep on going. All right.
All right, everyone. Take care. See you next week. Same time, same place. Bye-bye.